All right, Kenny, so tell us about our next guest.
All right, Eric, I'd love to. Our next guest is Ken Sinclair from AutomatedBuildings.com, and he goes by the handle Auto, so it was something interesting to learn about Ken. Ken Sinclair, we posted a while back the amazing flair of Ken Sinclair, and it's really because Ken Sinclair has probably been an anchorman in our business as far as the great librarian of all the relative data and information regarding building management systems. So without further ado, introducing Ken Sinclair.
Yeah, Ken, welcome to the show. I'd like to echo what Kenny says real quick. We're big Ken Sinclair fans. If you're not reading AutomatedBuildings.com, you are not in the know. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's great to be. I admire what you guys are doing, adding videos to the sleepy old automated building industry.
Ken, tell our listeners how Automated Buildings got started. How did you begin, and what was the origin of Automated Buildings?
The original idea was Jane and I had worked as energy consultants for some 30 years in Western Canada, energy automation consultants, and we retired. And so we were both arrived at home at the same time and just about killed each other. But we decided we should start Automated Buildings just to extend our lives. And it worked very well. So as usual, I went and did the talking and stayed in contact with a bunch of people I'd done business with in the past, and we thought it might be useful to bring this magazine online.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic, and I guess now you actually had a background in building automation controls. Am I correct? Did you at one point in time work with Johnson Controls?
That's correct. I started and trained as a service sales engineer for Johnson Controls in Edmonton, Alberta. That would be back in late '69, I believe. And I left Johnson in '73.
Right, so that was back when systems were truly open, right, with the pneumatic control systems?
Yeah, 15 PSI was the standard, that's for sure.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes, and so you left Johnson, and your wife Jane, who I guess is the editor there as well?
That's correct, and she's always been that. Even before Automated Buildings, she was writing a lot of the reports and stuff. We started a company called Sinclair Energy Services in 1975 in Edmonton, Alberta, and that was the early days of DDC. We were working on a direct digital system at the University of Alberta called the RCMS, the Remote Control Monitoring System. And we had PDP-11s for computers and Modcom panels that we dragged out of the concrete industry, and we had to basically build all our own sensors because they hadn't been invented yet. So it was a good place to learn about DDC.
Wow, well, yeah, Modicon, those are, like you say, the industrial PLCs. So you've just seen a lot. I mean, talk about, for instance, I mean, you've gone from line programming, I'm sure, very, very complicated, to the trend we're seeing today. It just seems like it's getting easier and easier, doesn't it, in terms of programming and setting up?
Actually, of interest, in the first system, in the DEC system, the digital logic and the analog logic ran in two separate files, and then you had to pass flags between them to make the control language work. So yes, we've seen a lot of changes.
Boy, I'd love to probably had the haystack tagging convention back in those days, huh?
Actually, believe it or not, I recognized early in the project that we needed that, and we adapted the ISA standards, which was kind of an interesting, for building automation, one of the first adaptations of that as well.
Well, Ken, I think anybody in our industry that's involved with controls or automation or integration or big data, has to be checking your website out, AutomatedBuildings.com. And if you haven't checked it out, be sure to.
And good stuff. Ken, tell us how you've seen so many changes over the years. How has that affected or altered the original mission statement of Automated Buildings?
Well, in the early stages, it was all about DDC, direct digital control, and I certainly grew up in the DDC revolution after leaving Alberta and went to the West Coast and grew up with the likes of Delta Control, Reliable Control, before either one of those were those companies. and we basically built our own controllers for the projects. And so we learned a lot. I was working as a consultant. They were working as contractors putting together their first systems. One of the comments was I asked them, what does the system do? And they returned the comment, what do you want the system to do? It was that undried. The paint was that undried that you could actually make it do anything you want. So it was exciting times. So I grew up in that time. So that is very much reflected in automated buildings, the whole VDC revolution. So the next revolution I saw, or evolution, was the internet. And what was happening there, just when we started in the early 90s, we actually took a lot of our documentation as one of the last projects. Well, I guess it wasn't really the last project, but a project I had done was to take the direct digital control specification and put it on the internet, which was early days because that was 1985, and that's still on the internet, that particular thing. It was actually done for the BCBC,
wow.
the British Columbia Building Corporation, and what happened there is they called their systems client comfort systems, so yet another name, and we put together the complete specification, complete with control language and graphics and naming convention in 1986.
Wow. I think that really, speaks to automated buildings and the type of content that's on there and why it's so useful to the folks in our industry.
All right, Ken, tell us about the interesting collaboration you had at the HR show this year, the Connection Community Collaboration. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. Again, it started in Chicago with Mark and I trying to come up with a name we could call ourselves, the folks that were basically pushing data up to the clouds. And we came up with the idea of a connection community. The following year in Dallas, which I think was maybe your first Control Trends Awards.
It was, yes.
In Dallas, yeah. We did a connection community. And what my thought was is I was going to introduce the connection community to the people who used the connection community. But when the community got together, they found out that they had a lot of questions for each other. And so then for the next year, we added the word collaboration. So it was Connection Community Collaboration, and we started a LinkedIn site. And several of the folks that had spoken in Dallas jumped in and were willing to speak in New York. And we moved away. In Dallas, we attempted to have each of them identify what their connection community looked like, how many people. And then in New York, we tried to move beyond that and just talk about how our connection communities were going to interact and how our connection communities would interact with, of course, big data and just IT thinking.
Well, we were fortunate enough to record. Thanks for inviting us in to do that. We actually did a video recording of that, most of that event. That's on ControlTrends.org. You can check it out, and I think there's a link on your website back to it as well, Ken, as well as a bunch of information about it. As a matter of fact, it seems like your February issue was, to a large part, sort of dedicated to that whole concept.
Yeah, we have the reviews of what went on in January, the snowy January in New York. The education sessions that we had 3 education sessions as well as the Connection Community Collaboration meeting, which you videoed for us. So we have a review of those on our site that links to the content that came from that. So we were very pleased. They were all well attended, especially considering the weather. The rooms in New York are smaller than most places, but yes. We were still filling them. But so that was good.
Hey, Ken, moving along here, what was the theme of Automated Buildings' February issue?
Our theme was mobile collaboration, and we just, in my editorial, I chat a little bit about just how significant the bring your own device and the cloud relationship is, and all of the things that are evolving out of that. And then Therese takes off and shows us how the cell networks are starting to be used, and that was certainly a theme at AHR in New York as well. There's a little chatter about LED lighting, and of course there's some very interesting stuff unrolling there that prior to LED lighting, all networks in buildings were put in for HVAC purposes. But now we have the situation that the LED, and even Jim's talking about power over Ethernet, feeding these lighting systems. All of a sudden, there's a brand new network in the building that has nothing to do with us. So I think that's of interest.
It's prophetic at sort of predicting, the changes in the industry. Seems like we are in the midst of a big change. How do you see it shaking out? I mean, you talk to people like Jim Young, they're talking about the master systems integrators, needing to change, what they bring to the table. You talk to Therese, it looks like we got a whole different, type of integrator coming in. Like you said, you just mentioned now we got an LED system that's heading into the building, a whole separate network. What does this bode for business as usual?
Business as usual. In a lot of ways, I've been in the industry long enough. You get in here for 5 decades, and there starts to be patterns repeating themselves. And as I mentioned, I grew up in the DDC revolution, and then basically automated buildings started in the internet revolution, and we're definitely now into the smart device cloud revolution. And we're starting to see the young kids coming across the floor from their games and basically entering the industry. And the way they look at big data and the way they look at remote devices and the way they look at controlling things is as radically different as the difference between DDC and Lattice. But that being said, the industry didn't perish, it thrived. And I do believe in the big data mobile scene. I think that'll be true, except for those that don't pay attention and don't watch what is happening in the change and how they are going to be part of it.
Okay, there you have it. That's Ken Sinclair from AutomatedBuildings.com. Be sure to check his website out, AutomatedBuildings.com. February issue's out. March is coming up. It's a must read. Check it out. Ken, thanks a lot.